Hello there, welcome to my channel, which is focused on tech and tech innovations, tech investment opportunities within now and the next 8 years. Today I'll be talking about the Cold War. Um, if we go back to history, the first Cold War lasted for about 50 years between I think 1945 to 1980 to 1990, 80 or 90. And apparently, from general information, the West is pointing a finger at Russia for starting the first Cold War, claiming that the Russian ruler at the time stationed soldiers in a lot of the satellite Russian states, which are the countries bordering the Russian country. For example, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, all those countries, Latvia, all those countries bordering Belarus, bordering Russia. And this, obviously, these soldiers being stationed in these countries, and also you had the Cuban Missile Crisis where the Russians put a missile in Cuba, which was a communist country. And all these actions were viewed by the West as aggressive and an act of war. There was hardly ever any direct confrontation between Russia and the USA, obviously because they were both two nuclear powers and they had both seen the effects of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan, which ended, I think, Second World War. So they resorted to a war of attrition, which was mostly economical, and using proxies to fight their wars. And it ended with the Soviet Union crumbling, and obviously having conditions where they would give up some satellite states and agree not to encroach on other countries as long as NATO did not come into close proximity with Russia. Why is this essential? It's because during that period, there were very little developments in terms of tech, obviously because of the lack of sharing of information and the decoupling of the economy and the lack of, or let's say less mobility of people between the East and the West. And we see a similar thing happening or beginning to happen now, where I believe there's a Cold War going on now because from Russia's point of view, they claim that the West, based on the end of the first Cold War, they agreed that the West would not extend NATO closer to the Russian borders, and they did. And Russia apparently claims they won the West one or two times, and that was the reason for going into Ukraine and attacking Ukraine. And what has that done to technology? You can see that the Russians did not use high-tech instruments. They used a lot of old Second World War ammunition, and a lot of people died. And the only sort of new thing we saw in the war, or I saw in the war, was the use of drones, and also Neuralink, which is obviously new, which also helped the Russians, the Ukrainians, to be able to pinpoint some Russian targets. But apart from that, there wasn't really much, again, innovation in the war. How is this relevant to tech, the tech world? Normally, in times of Cold Wars or wars, most of the tech or the industries are kind of like remodeled to serve the purposes of the Cold War, which means that the tech industry in general will not develop as fast as it should, even with ChatGPT or AI being mentioned as something which would rule the world, and quantum computing being something which is very within reach within a few years. That still would not, in my opinion, will not go as fast as it should have evolved technology. And also with the Cold War and the decoupling of the banks, for example, HSBC Bank did what you call a restructuring of the company, and they split the company between the East and the West. So you have a Western arm of the HSBC and an Eastern arm of the HSBC. Also, during the war, you had obviously all the Russian oligarchs, their yachts getting seized and their properties getting seized in the West, and you had Western tech companies and other companies exiting either partially or fully Russia. So there's been, and with all this decoupling of companies comes the loss of tech. For example, you had like the payment systems, which Russia got frozen out of, which is also obviously tech, and they are trying to do their own payment systems with BRICS now. So as you can see, a Cold War is not really good for tech. It just remodels the current tech to serve the purposes of a Cold War. You can also see that, for example, Europe was relying heavily on American, not just military, but the tech and cybersecurity companies like Cisco, HP, Alcatel, Dell, Juniper, NVIDIA, just to name a few of them. But with the US currently focusing on its own issues, Europe is left with a very big gap in this particular sector. And they have increased, almost every European country has increased their defense budget, especially the cybersecurity budgets, in order to be able to cope with so-called threats in this area, and there's been obviously adverts and campaigns going on how to stay safe during a potential war or nuclear attack, and also news on potential safe sites or World War III, World War II bunkers, which are which can take far less of the population, if at all there was something happening, like an actual war, which would not get there. But like as explained, cold wars are simply wars of attrition. By that I mean that it's the person who has the most resources tries to grind the other person down slowly, steadily, until one person gives up. So it's more like a marathon rather than a sprint, to see who has the highest endurance, and that, in my opinion, will not be very good for tech moving forward within the next 8 years, the tech world in general, because most of the activities are going to be focused on the military side of it. You know, you have, for instance, the Chinese warning their cybersecurity and AI experts not to leave the country because they might have a security risk in leaving the country. You also had the case of Huawei, which is a cybersecurity company which has been competing with the European cybersecurity companies and American cybersecurity companies because it's far cheaper, and they've been blocked from having many contracts in the UK and in the USA for national security measures, claiming that the Chinese put spy software into them in order to steal secrets from America and from Europe. And the daughter of the owner of Huawei was captured in Canada, and before she was released, you know, they had to make some concessions. So there's all this, you know, restriction of flow of talent from one area of the world to the other area of the world. This obviously lack of sharing of information would affect the growth of the tech industry tremendously moving forward, even with AI. Also, you have TikTok. You know, the U.S. insisting on getting the Chinese to sell TikTok to them because they claim TikTok is a national security issue, and also America trying to bring all the manufacturing jobs back to America. So, as you can see, from my understanding, technology is gonna grow slower than it would have grown without the presence of a so-called Cold War. Because based on the definition of a Cold War and based on what happened between 1945, after the end of the Second World War and the end of the Soviet Union, the world was in a proxy war between these two superpowers. So that's where we stand in terms of a Cold War or recession. Because normally Cold Wars lead to recessions. The last Cold War had 3 recessions, and I believe that this current Cold War will have a few more recessions. We've already had 2, 2008 and 2020, and I feel like we are heading into a far darker economic climate, which would affect a lot of people, a lot of normal people. And what can they do in this situation? My suggestion would be getting up to date with the current industries they find themselves in, and maybe some AI training if they're in tech, because AI is the people who can use AI will be the new kings of the job market, compared to those who can use it. So this is my prediction for moving forward about the current Cold War and the unstoppable recession, which we are either in one or should be getting into one shortly, and the bleak economic and tech future ahead. So like, share, subscribe, let your loved ones know about my message, because it is very important that we are prepared for the next 8 years. Thank you very much.